Well, hello folks, and welcome to this tutorial. I suppose we can call it a boot camp on Trongate MX. Now, I've done one or two little tutorials about Trongate MX previously, but now I think that we've reached a stage where this thing is pretty solid and pretty settled, and I think this is a good time to just lay it on you and show you everything you need to get started using Trongate MX. So, let me begin by just telling you what Trongate MX is and the problems that it solves. And I can tell you that Trongate MX is really just a JavaScript library for developers who don't like writing JavaScript. So it was inspired by HTMX, which is why I gave it this name. And it was actually also inspired by a job that I was doing for a client who had asked for an online shop with a thing called shipping station integration. It was a thing you would click and a modal window would pop up. It would query an API and you would choose a shipping provider like FedEx, Royal Mail, DHL, all of that stuff. You've probably used something like that before. Anyway, I had a client who asked for this and it took ages. It took about 2 weeks, and I thought there must be another way, because I don't want to have to write thousands of lines of JavaScript. And that was really where the need came from. So with Trongate MX, you're able to do a whole bunch of really powerful stuff where JavaScript's going on in the background, but you don't have to write much JavaScript at all. And that's pretty much it. As I said, it is very much inspired by HTMX. I make no secret of it, but I dare say Trongate MX has evolved a lot. It has a lot more features. In terms of size, it's comparable to something like Angular. And what else can I tell you about Trongate MX? Yeah, the two main reasons why I made Trongate MX is because I wanted something that was tightly integrated with the Trongate PHP framework. And I also wanted something that had rock solid stability. So, end of introduction, shall we dance? Alright, now, I should say, Trongate MX, in case you're wondering, it really is just a JavaScript file. At the time of doing this video, it's about 2,000 lines of code. You can go to the Trongate repo on GitHub and see it. Here it is here. It comes with every version of the Trongate framework. Now, this is Trongate MX. Strictly speaking, you could just go to GitHub, and I'll leave a link in the description. You could grab this file, it's in the public folder, include it, and you'd have Trongate MX. You don't need to use the Trongate framework. You don't even need to use PHP. It's just a JavaScript library. But nevertheless, I am going to be using Trongate and I am going to be using PHP just for speed. And in this video, I'm going to walk you through a lot of these features that are covered in the documentation. I won't go through all of them because we would be here until next Christmas, but I'll get you through all of the main ones. So let me start by telling you that I'm running XAMPP on my computer. Now, once again, strictly speaking, you don't have to do this. And I am going to use the Trongate framework, the PHP one. Again, you don't have to do that. But I'm just doing this for speed, if that's okay with you. So I'm going to be using the Trongate desktop app for this. Now, this is a free download that you can get from trongate.io/download. You don't need to download it. You don't need to use it. You can get the thing from GitHub or whatever. I'm just saying it's here if you want it. Oh, and by the way, I'm redesigning this desktop app, so there's a chance that it might look a little bit different to this. Anyway, with your permission, I'm going to create a new app. I have a really itchy nose. The moment I hit record, my nose... It's hay fever. I'm telling you, it's hay fever. It's that time of year. Anyway, I'm going to create a new app. I'll call it Trongate MX Bootcamp. This is going to be the name of the app, right? I'll hit submit. I'll enter a base URL. I'll click here, submit. And I'm going to choose the htdocs folder. Here it is here. And I'm going to create new app. So that's downloading the Trongate PHP framework. There it is. It's added it to localhost and we are ready. So that's not what I wanted. Let me open up my text editor here. Where on earth is it? Trongate MX Bootcamp. Here it is here. So this is what we've just downloaded, okay? You can see, I'll just make sure my levels are working. Yep. Okay. You can see that we've got a config folder here. Our configuration is all set up. This is the base URL. This is the default module, welcome, the default controller, and the default method. If we go to modules, welcome, controllers, welcome.php, you'll see an index method in here. It may look a little bit different from this, but nevertheless, if you echo hello, a little die statement, and then go to your home page, you can see on the top left that it says hello, okay? So that's just a basic Trongate installation. And by the way, if you echo base URL like this, okay, like this, it will tell you the base URL. And this is defined, of course, inside the config folder. This is going to be important in just a minute, by the way. But what we're going to do is we'll take this out. So we've got the home page back to the way that it was. And I'm going to make a new endpoint here, or a new method, I should say. I'll make this one public, and we'll call this one test, okay? And we'll do a little comment and just say basic Trongate MX test, something like this, okay? Now, the way that this is going to work, we'll have a view file. I'll say data, view file is test. There's no need to say .php, by the way. And then I'm going to load up a template. The Trongate framework comes with a couple of different templates, but we are going to make a custom template. So I'll call it custom. And of course, you can call it anything you want. And I'm going to pass in the data. All right. Now, if we go to our base URL, /welcome, /test, you can see that it says cannot find custom method inside templates and all of that stuff. So I'm going to go into templates, controllers, templates. Now I can see that we've got a method here called public. Your method may look different. It probably does. I might add this, I don't know. But anyway, let's make a method that's kind of similar. Whatever it looks like, just copy it and we'll rename it from public to custom. So that means that when somebody calls a custom template like here, it's going to invoke this custom method within the templates module here. And I'll just echo yes with a die statement. Do you see that working? Okay, this is how Trongate's template system works. Now, it's trying to load up a thing called custom. And it's going to be looking inside the views directory. That's the views directory within templates. So let's make a new file and we'll call it custom.php. Save it. And that is going to be our HTML template. So, shall we have a little bit of HTML? Now, I'm using Emmet for speed, but I assume that you know how to make an HTML file, and if you don't, I suppose you can pause the screen. But let me just very quickly put something together here. I'll just have an let's have a class of container, and h1, and I'll just say Trongate MX test. And I'll save that. Okay, so not too impressive, but what we'll do is in the head section, I'm going to add a base element, and it's going to have an href value that is set to the base URL. You'll remember that I showed you what the base URL means just a minute ago. And then inside the head section still, I'm going to say link, tab out, and I'm going to reference a style sheet, which is at css/Trongate.css. This comes with the framework, and it's inside the public directory. In fact, here it is here. Now, because we've added this base thing in here, we don't need to do any of this shenanigans or echo base URL or something. This base element makes life so much easier because we can just reference it like this and everything will be fine. Now, let's do another link to Trongate MX itself. Now, Trongate MX is inside the JS folder, which is part of this public directory. Here's Trongate MX. And to include it, I'm going to say script. And we can just say src equals. So we've got opening and closing script tags. And we'll say js/Trongate-mx.js and save it. Now, some of you are wondering, or maybe you were thinking, well, why is it not down here? Maybe you were expecting that. You can do that if you want, but the head section will be fine because if I show you the Trongate MX code base, it doesn't really kick in until the page has loaded. DOM content loaded. So for that reason, it's perfectly acceptable to include Trongate MX like this. And I'll change the title, Trongate MX tutorial, something like that. And there we go. Now you can see that our headline has changed. That means the style sheet's working. If you want to really check, you can view the source code, have a little click. There's our style sheet. Click on Trongate MX. There it is. So we are locked and loaded and all is well. But before we get doing any coding, there's a couple of other things I'd like to do if that's okay. Firstly, I'm going to do a little bit of custom styling here, just right on the page. So I'm going to say for the body, this is the page body, the background color is going to be all of the 3s. And you'll remember that I added in a class of container here. So I'll say for dot container, the background color is white. So all of the Fs. And I'll say that the minimum height is 100 VH. That is, of course, the viewport height. I'll also, might as well, add in H1 text align center. So that's going to align this to the center of the page, okay? So a little bit of styling, I hope you don't mind. Let's save and refresh. And there we go. I think that is fantastic. All right. Now, there's another thing that I almost forgot. If I take you back to this welcome controller here, you remember that we said view file equals test, okay? So let's create this view file. Now this is a view file that's going to live inside the welcome module. So in the welcome module on the left, I'm making a new folder called views. And inside this, we'll have a new file called test.php. Okay, so we've now created this view file called test. Our next goal is to have this view file being rendered, but within the template. And we can do this with one line of code. If we go into custom, I'll go to where this container part is and take this out. And in its place, I'm going to echo using PHP short tags, template, : display, and I'm passing in an argument of data and then closing off PHP. It's an awkward little line for sure, but you only have to do this once. And when you do that, it's going to replace this with, I'll hit refresh, it's replaced it with the content from the view file. Kind of cool, kind of cool. So let's go into the view file. Let's make this a little bit more interesting. I'll have an H1 and I'll just say basic Trongate MX test, something like that. And then down here, I'll have a paragraph. I'll add in a class of text center, and I'll have a button that says click me and save. Okay, so there's what we've got. Now, if you want, you can make your button a little bit bigger. We can even just go to this paragraph and say class is LG for large, and you'll see that it makes the button a little bit bigger. You don't have to do that. I'm just saying that you can if you want to. All right, so that's our basic setup. Shall we finally start using Trongate MX? Okay, so we're going to do a really basic test first of all, and the test is that we are going to fetch the content from our base URL. Now you'll remember, if we echo base URL, this is defined inside config here, and the base URL is of course the home page, which looks something like this. It might be redesigned, who cares? It's basically the default home page, right? So let's assume that we would like to fetch from the base URL, and we'd like that to happen when you click this button. Well, what we are really doing from a web developer's perspective is called an HTTP request, and specifically it's a GET request. So I'm going to say mx-get equals, and then I'm going to chuck in the URL that I'd like to query, and here it is here. Now, by the way, you can chuck in base URL if you want, but I want to just keep the PHP to a minimum if possible here. So that's going to be the URL that I'd like to fetch stuff from, and I'm adding what I'm calling an MX attribute, and it's mx-get. It's going to be doing a GET request, and it's going to grab the contents of that and then chuck it inside the button itself. It's going to look a bit weird, but let's try it. We'll save, and let's just click on this, and there you go. Now, do you see that blue on the outside? That is because it has grabbed the content and it has chucked it inside here, which is a bit strange. But the good news is there's an attribute that you can use called mx target. And I'll do it right now. I'll do a new line, and I'm going to say mx target equals, and we can define somewhere which is where the response should go. You don't need to type that in, by the way, but this is how mx target works. So let's imagine we've got a div with an ID of response. Now it's an empty div, right? But we can say mx target equals # response and save. And so now if I click on this click me button here, boom, you can see that the response is now being added inside this div here. Okay? By the way, if anybody's familiar with HTMX, you're probably thinking, well, this is really, really similar. Look, I make no secret of the fact it's inspired by HTMX, but stick with me because this is going to start very simple, and then as we move forward, the features are going to become more and more powerful as we move on. And I dare say there's a lot of stuff that HTMX does not have. I'm sure there's things HTMX does have that this does not have. But anyway, just stick with me is all I'm saying, okay? So that's what we've got so far, and there we go. Let's imagine that we would like to select just a part of the page, such as the headline. Well, there is an attribute for that. It's called mx-select. So we would say mx-select equals, and then chuck in h1, which obviously means the headline. So now, if I click this button here, you can see that it's grabbed the headline from this page, and it's now chucking that headline inside our response div. Can you see that? So again, if we look inside here, it's populating here. Now, in case you're wondering, these MX attributes are all covered in the documentation. We've got a reference section here. It's actually on the live website. So if you go to documentation, Trongate MX, and it's all documented here. So the one that I just showed you is MX Select, and I'm really pleased with the documentation. There's loads of examples. You can look up the function references wherever they appear, and there's best practices and stuff like that. So please do check out the documentation. It's highly recommended. Now, the next thing I'm going to show you is querying. I mean, this is querying a website on localhost. But what if we want to query a website that's a third-party site, like one on the internet? Take, for example, the Trongate website here. What if we wanted to fetch from this? Well, let's do a little demonstration. I'll copy this button here. Okay, and instead of saying click me, I'll say fetch from trongate.io. That's the website, and by all means you can follow along. And I'm going to change the URL to https://trongate.io. I'll keep the target as response, and we'll take this MX select out. We'll keep it really simple, okay? So let's save. Where on earth did it go? Here we go. So let's refresh. Okay, so this is the local page on the left. It works without any problems. And now let's fetch from trongate.io. Oh dear, nothing happened. So that's a bit of a downer. And if you inspect and have a look at the console, you'll see that there's an error. And it's to do with the request being blocked due to the CORS policy. And this is a problem that you get when you try to use any JavaScript actually to query somebody else's website. But the good news is there is a workaround, a very simple workaround actually, and I'll just show you that really quickly. So suppose we go to the welcome controller file here, and we're going to make a new method. I'll call it fetch from Trongate. There you go. And I'm going to just say target URL is https://trongate.io. So that's the target URL. And then I'm going to say response body is file get contents from the target URL, and I'll just echo the response body. So now I'm using PHP, not JavaScript, but PHP to fetch from this URL. And by the way, if we go to welcome/fetch from Trongate, you'll see that it has no problems at all. Look at the address, we're still local here, but it has fetched from the Trongate website. It's one of the nice things about PHP, you know. It can do things like this, whereas the JavaScript stuff can sometimes be problematic. Okay, so we've got an API endpoint here, right? Here it is. Now, I will go back to our page here. And where we're doing this GET request, I'll paste in welcome/fetch from Trongate. There's really no need to do a full URL, by the way, because we've got our base element in the template here. So we're now going to be fetching from our own endpoint, which is then going to use PHP to fetch from the Trongate website. Let's give this a try. And there you go. Now, it looks terrible. Of course it does, because we don't have any styling or anything like that. But nevertheless, it has selected the thing. Let's say, for example, we wanted to select the headline from the Trongate site. We could say mx select equals h1. Now, by the way, you might get something weird here. I'm just going to click. There you go. That's the headline. It looks like that's not the headline when you visit the site. You probably expected this. But actually, I had a headline in it about a week or two ago because I just wanted to do an experiment and see if the AI engines would start saying it's for large-scale projects. So excuse my silly little experiment. Nevertheless, you see how it's fetching the H1? I'll chuck in an H2. Here we go. And there you go. Kinda cool, right? Kinda cool. Now, the next thing I want to show you is how to execute JavaScript functions before and after requests. I said at the introduction that the whole point of Trongate MX was so that you did not have to write any JavaScript. But, well, I hope you'll agree that we're saving you a whole lot of JavaScript here as things stand, but there will be occasions from time to time when you might need to do, you know, a couple of little custom things. And I think that it's right that we do have that functionality for anybody who needs that type of thing. So let's do a little JavaScript function that kicks in after something has been swapped. Now, this is all mentioned in the documentation. The particular thing that we are going to be looking at is going to be called mx after swap. So after a swap has happened, we're going to invoke our own custom JavaScript. So I'll go back to this first example here, and I'm going to just say mx after swap equals, and then inside here, we're going to chuck in the name of a JavaScript function that we would like to invoke. So how about something like blink response? And again, this is just going to be the name of a JavaScript function. You can call it anything you want, but that's going to be the name of my own little function. I'm going to head downstairs here, and I'm going to say script. I'll say function. Blink response. Give me a minute. My cat's sick. All right, apologies for that. So I'm going to invoke a little JavaScript after the swap. So what shall we do? Well, the choice is yours. I think I'm going to make the thing blink. So I'll say const response element is document dot query selector. You can use get element by ID if you want, but I'll say document query selector is response, and then I'm just going to say response element dot class list dot add blink and save it. Okay, so if we refresh and then I'm just going to click, now you can see that the response is blinking there. And of course, this blink is part of Trongate.css. Okay, so what you've just had is a way of invoking your own custom JavaScript functions after an HTTP request has happened and stuff has been swapped on the page. Now I'm going to show you how to invoke your own custom JavaScript functions at the point when an HTTP request has been invoked. In other words, as soon as you click the button, something's going to happen. Let me show you that right now. And we can do this with the mx-on-trigger attribute. So I'm just going to say mx-on-trigger, and I'll demonstrate this. And let's have a function, we'll call it goRed, like this. I'm using camel case because it's JavaScript here. And I'm going to just say function goRed. Now, one of the things about these features, both mx-after-swap and mx-on-trigger, is that when you write these functions, they do have the ability, but not the obligation, to accept an event object. Now, you don't have to do anything strange up here, but you can just say EV or event, let's say, and we can say const clicked element is event.target, and then we can say clicked element dot style dot background color is red. Actually, I'll do it like this. FF 1 2 3 4 like this, and then I'll say clicked element dot style dot border is 1 pix FF000 solid. Okay, so this is going to be at the point of clicking, it's going to do this. And then let's have a little set timeout. I'll wait 3 seconds. And then in 3 seconds, I'll just say clicked element, remove attribute, style, and save. Okay, so what's going to happen is when I click this, it's going to go red, which it does. And then after 3 seconds, it goes back to going blue again. So that, my friends, is the mx-on-trigger attribute and the mx-after-swap attribute. Remember, these can accept event objects if you want, but it's entirely up to you. Okay, the next thing I want to do, I'm going to go back to this button here, this fetch from Trongate one, and there's something I'd like to show you. If I click fetch from Trongate, you'll notice that there's a little delay there, which is unsurprising because it's fetching from the web, right? So wouldn't it be nice if we could have a little loading indicator? Well, with Trongate MX, that type of thing is really easy. All you have to do is have a div with a class of spinner like this. So it's just an empty div with a class of spinner. And if we refresh, you'll see that we've got this little spinning element here, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to make it so that that spinner element will appear at the point when we've clicked this button and we're waiting on a response. So the way that we do this is really easy. We're going to say in the spinner itself, we're going to add a class of mx indicator and save it. And then inside here, we're going to say mx indicator equals, and then I'll add in a CSS selector of dot spinner. So what this means is that the moment we click this, this spinner will appear, and then when the stuff has been fetched, this spinner will disappear. Now, to really show you this, I'm going to go to my welcome file here, and on fetch for Trongate, I'll add in sleep, and then the number 2 in parenthesis. That is going to make this thing wait for 2 seconds. It's just so that you can see this thing working, right? So save that. Okay, and I've hit refresh. Now you can see that we cannot see the spinner here. And if we click fetch from Trongate.io, it's going to go like that. And then it goes like that. How cool is that? So that's our loading indicator. Click. And there you go. Now, by the way, there is a hypothetical possibility. If I do a hard reload, it's a hard reload. Let me do this. Making life difficult for myself. But, do you see how we're getting a little blink of that indicator? Okay. It's the kind of thing that might happen. If that really bothers you, then the advice is add in style display none. And so that means that even if somebody does a complete hard reload, you'll never ever see that spinner unless they click, and there you go. Okay. So we've covered quite a lot here. The pace has been pretty fast, and I have to say, I think that we're doing quite good. The next thing that I want to show you now is how to write the syntax here, but using Trongate syntax. Now, what we're doing here is just using pure HTML. It's really just HTML with custom attributes. But I just want to let you know that you can use a different type of syntax with the Trongate framework. So you don't have to do this. Maybe you'll like it, maybe you won't. But I'm going to go into PHP and I'm going to echo form button. We'll give the button a name. I'll call it fetch. And then I'll say fetch from Trongate.io and save. So do you see how we've now got 3 buttons here? Okay, so the next thing would be, how do we add the attributes on? Well, we can say btn underscore attra for attributes equals, and we've got square brackets. And now I'm going to add in a whole bunch of key value pairs. So it's going to be mx-get is assigned to, and you chuck this in, a little comma. And then we've got mx-target, which is assigned to, in this case, response. Then we've got mx-select, in this case, h2. And finally, mx-indicator, which is assigned to dot spinner. And then we've made this array of key value pairs. I'm just going to pass this in as an argument, save it. And now if I click the button on the right, there's our spinner and there's our response, and everything is fantastic. So now you know that there's 2 different types of syntax that we can use for this. Pick the one that makes you feel good, and that one will be the best one. Alright, now so far we've had it so that you can press a button and it fetches some stuff from an API endpoint, and then it swaps out one part of the page that you are looking at using Trongate MX. Now that's very nice. I hope you like the feature. But sometimes you might want to swap out more than one part of a page. Maybe a little part up here, but a little part down here as well. And for that, we're going to be using out-of-band swaps. What out-of-band swaps do is they let you select different parts of a page from somewhere and then strategically place those different parts anywhere that you like. Take, for example, this website, which is Bloomberg. You can see along the top here, we've got the S&P 500, the NASDAQ, and so on. And over here on the right, we've got the latest news. Here's a chart here. These are all things that could potentially be fetched and then added onto one of our pages using Trongate MX. Another example would be the CNBC website. Here you can see we've got these different readouts. Looks like they're having a pretty bad day. But again, these are different readouts from somebody's doing okay. Different readouts from the stock market. Here's the latest news and so on. So the point is that we're not limited to just swapping one area as we've been doing so far. We can do multiple swaps, and that's what out-of-band swaps is all about. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to set up a little informational page. I'm going to go back to the welcome controller here. And let's just have another public method. I'll call this one info. And we won't bother with templates. Let's make life easy. We'll just say this, and we'll load up a view file called info. So into the views folder of the welcome module, and it's info.php. Okay, save it. So if we now go to welcome/info, you'll see that it's just giving us this view file here. And what I'm going to do is I'll very quickly turn this into a web page. So I'll do this, and I'll have, let's have two, well, okay, let's do a headline, and we'll just say info page. There we go. Let's have a paragraph, and we'll say this page contains information. All right. Let's have a little div here, which is going to be called weather. And we'll just say that the weather is hot and sunny. Okay. Let's have another little div here, and we'll call this date and time. And in here, I'm going to do a little bit of PHP if that's okay. So I'm just going to echo with PHP short tags. I'll use the date function, and I'll say L, lowercase j, uppercase S, uppercase F, uppercase Y. Then I'm going to say \A, \T, space, uppercase H, colon, lowercase I. How on earth did I remember all of that? And I'm not looking at notes, you look at my eyes here. I have a video on YouTube, I teach you how to remember this. It takes 15 minutes, you do it once, you'll never have to look this stuff up again. Maybe I'll leave a link to that if I can find it. Anyway, that's how I'd like the dates to be formatted, and I want it to be formatted with respect to the current time. So I'm adding in time and parenthesis as an argument here. So save and refresh. And I missed a quotation. There we go. Right, now, I'm curious, do I even need to add this time in here? There's your answer, I don't. So if we leave that out, it's just going to default to the current time. So there we go. There's our information page. Hot and sunny. It's giving us the weather, and it's giving us the day and the date, okay? Okay, now let's go back to... Actually, we had a thing called test here. Pardon me. We had welcome /test. This is the page that we've made. I think we'll have a test too, just to keep this simple. So let's go into the welcome controller, and we'll copy this one that says test, and we're going to have another one called test2. Okay, so if we go to our URL, base URL /welcome /test2. All right. Now let's make this test2 view file here. So it's test2.php. And we'll have a headline that says testing out of band swaps. Okay. So once again, we'll have a button here like this. And I'll just say click me again. I'll align the button to the center by adding a class of text center onto this paragraph up here. We can make the button a little bit bigger by adding a class of LG. And then I'll say response. And so we'll say mx get equals. Now we're going to go to welcome /info. Do you remember the info page? And for the moment, I'll say mx target. So what are we going to target, or where are we going to send this? And we'll send it to this response thing here. So if we do that, it's fetching from the info page. There's nothing new there, by the way. There's nothing there that is shocking. That's about as basic an example as we can get. But let's imagine that we would like to have the date somewhere. Maybe we'd like to have it here. I'll do a little div with an ID of the date, okay? And maybe we'd like to have some text here. So I'll just say, let's have a subheadline. I am testing out of band swaps. Let's have a little paragraph. Chuck anything you want in, it doesn't really matter. And let's take out this response and we'll have a div with an ID of the weather. Okay? Now, so that you can see these things, we'll do a bit of styling and we'll say that the date, comma, the weather, and let's just say that they've both got a padding of 3M, a border of 3 pixels, all the threes, solid, maybe a border radius of 6 pixels, anything you want. I'm just kind of making it up here. Let's give them a width of 240 pixels and let's give them a minimum height of, let's just go with 120 pixels, okay? So if we save and refresh, there's our 2 divs. And in fact, I'll go a wee bit further. Let's make it so that the date has a background colour of yellow and the weather is going to have a background colour of lime. And in fact, just to really confuse everybody, I'll have a div here with a class of flex row justify end. My fingers are crossed here. I hope this works. Alright, cool. Yeah, so there's some stuff in Trongate CSS. I tell you, I'm having a hard time keeping up with all of this stuff we've got. But we do have a library called Trongate CSS. And all I was doing there was I was adding in these flex classes. Something like that, okay? Alright, so anyway, if you've managed to follow along with that, you should have a page that looks something like this, alright? Now, to do MX out of band swaps, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to say MX target is none. Because I don't want it to behave like an ordinary request here. And right around here, I'll say MX. Now, I am going to refer to the documentation. It can be a little bit tricky, you know. So it's going to be MX select OOB, right? That's how we do it. MX select OOB equals. Now, the syntax for this, would you mind if I do some new lines and make a bit of space here? Okay, so the syntax takes the following form. You can see it right on the documentations here. We basically say what we're going to fetch, where it's going to go. Then we do a little comma and we say what we're going to fetch, where it's going to go. That is hopefully the way that these things are defined. So if we think about our target website or our target web page, it's this info page here, right? If we look at this hot and sunny thing, it's inside a div with an ID of weather. So I'm going to fetch weather. See how it's the first thing? And I'm going to assign it to the weather. The hyphen weather. So we have a little hash symbol and there you go. Then I'm going to fetch. Now we've got date and time here. So I'm fetching date and time. And where do we want it to go? Well, we've got a div here with an ID of the date. So hash symbol the date. Okay, so save that, refresh, and I'm going to click and look at that. It has chucked the date here and it has chucked the weather down here. Now, there are a few other ways of doing the syntax for that, by the way, but I would draw your attention to the documentation and you'll see that for yourself. find the syntax that you like best, and that one will be the winner. Folks, I think I'm going to leave it at that for the moment. We'll call that part 1. If you'd like a part 2, then please give this video a like, a thumbs up, whatever they're calling it these days. And leave a comment if you've got any questions or anything, and I promise I shall do my very best to respond. So thanks a lot, and I'll see you soon, hopefully.